Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to Sage's Memorial Day State of the Union address. So, happy Memorial Day to you. I will admit that I did play hooky yesterday and went to the lake, gave into some peer pressure from family and friends to have a lake day. And I did go out to the lake to enjoy the Memorial Day weekend yesterday. Got a little bit of sun, not much. Tried to stay in the shade as much as I could. I trust that you had a great Memorial Day weekend. When this day rolls around every year, which we know is to recognize the sacrifice of our men and women who have fought to defend this country in the many wars since its founding. And that Memorial Day is when we pay tribute to those. It's when that saying comes to mind, all gave some, but some gave all. Now, I have had a deep experience in life rubbing elbows with the survivors of these wars, the people that did come home alive. I've known World War I veterans, World War II veterans, Korean War veterans, my dad was one, and Vietnam War veterans, as well as more recent veterans of the 20-year war in the Middle East. And looking back at that greatest generation, I really think that that's the insight that people my age have that people younger than, say, mid-50s don't have. You might have known some of those men who fought the Nazis in World War II. But by the time most of you younger than me got to know them, they were probably very old. They were in nursing homes. But I was raised when this greatest generation was running the world. I knew these men well, these men who fought to defend our country in World War II. In some cases, they were my direct supervisors, my mentors, and my older family members. And I can tell you that the world and the country of the United States that they fought to defend doesn't exist anymore. If I were in possession of a time teleportation device to bring somebody from that era to our modern time, not only would they not be patriotic, not only would they not be in favor of the current government and the way that we conduct ourselves globally, but I believe that they would see our own government as a much bigger danger than the foreign dangers were during their time. I believe those men would be disgusted by the nature of the country as it is today. What would they see if they could come from the past to our time? Those men that gave their lives, had they survived and come home, and they were able to look into the future and see the world today, how would they feel about us? How would they feel about our government? How would they feel about our culture? How would they feel about our society? How would they feel about our global politics? Well, I can't speak for them. Other than having known them, I can guess, better than most of you who didn't know them, what they would think of the world today. What would their State of the Union address look like? The first thing that would pop to their attention, it's not what you think. It's not even the moral decay of our society. It's not even the fact that we can't define what a woman is. It isn't even the political rhetoric. I think the first thing that would pop to mind for them they would be flabbergasted by the prices. Even when you adjust for inflation, we are overtaxed, overworked, and underpaid compared to their generation, comparatively, when you factor in inflation. And what am I trying to say? Well, the United States that these men went off to Europe to fight to preserve was a place where one man could go to work 40 hours a week and earn enough money at just about any job to keep his family fed and a roof over their house, over their heads. That they could afford housing, they could afford, basic small luxury items, they could afford a vacation, all on one person's salary. Well, in my lifetime, as I was a little kid, the world had already changed so much. While they were still alive, these men of renown, these men who fought to preserve our nation in the 1940s, many of those veterans were still alive when it came to the point where a man and a woman had to both work and there was no one to stay home and keep the home fires burning. There was no one there to take care of the kids, and a whole generation of kids, my generation of kids, were known as latchkey kids because of this phenomenon. But in my lifetime, I've seen that come to the point where even with both parents working, they can barely pay the bills. Even with both parents working, they can barely keep the family fed. And now we're entering in yet to another level of economic destruction where even the kids and the teenagers have to contribute. That everyone in the family has to work to pay the bills in this modern world, where the world that these veterans that we celebrate today that didn't come home, the world that they left to defend, was a place, the country of the United States was a place where one man could work a moderate week and provide for his whole family. I think that would be the first thing that jumped out at them, is the economic slavery. The level of taxation also would jump out at them, that we were being taxed from every area. The next thing that would jump out to them, I believe, would be the total breakdown of our Second Amendment. Now, I've got to say, we've made a grand turn towards protecting the Second Amendment just in the last 5 years. And this is because when Donald Trump was president, he got to pick 2 Supreme Court justices. So it tipped the scale in the favor of the conservatives and in the favor of what I call the Freedom Party, people who believe in the Bill of Rights and protecting those rights that were laid down by our founding fathers. But still, they would see things as unbelievable and undigestible that happen on a regular basis. For instance, this recent ATF raid in Arkansas, where the president of the airport board, the highest paid civilian government employee in the Little Rock area, was targeted by the ATF in a no-knock raid in the middle of the night, in the wee hours of the morning, where they busted down his door and shot him to death in his own house because he bought too many guns. He bought more guns than they thought he deserved to have. And in reality, the guy was a collector. He made $260,000 a year and had a lot of, liquid income. And he was able to feed his desire to collect guns and his obsession with firearms. And that was seen as a criminal act by at least one judge. This warrant was issued where they treated this man like a felon, and he was an upstanding citizen. And these no-knock warrants, these raids where they come in with military weapons and precision and military tactics and shoot anybody who doesn't immediately lay down on the ground, is something that evolved out of the 1980s war on drugs. It didn't exist before. This kind of raid against U.S. citizens would be appalled. They would be appalled. The greatest generation, these men who, had they survived, would have lived, some of them, to see this. Some of this greatest generation has lived to see this. My mother is the not quite greatest generation. She's the silent generation, and she's 90. But there are some of these people that have lived to see this turnover, where military tactics and military weapons are used against people. And it was bad enough when we were using them against drug dealers and drug lords and criminals. Now they're being used against people who break rules, not even laws, because there was no law. And I don't want to get into that topic, but yeah, the raids, the overstep by the police, these videos where police drag people out of their cars and beat them simply by asking why they were pulled over. That any adherence to your rights, any standing up for yourself and your God-given rights that are guaranteed in the Bill of Rights, any of that by modern law enforcement is seen as being difficult or resisting arrest or even assault. And they are beating people up for what they say. They're dragging people out of their cars and beating them. They're shooting people for answering the door in the middle of the night with a gun, not even pointed at the police, but just in their hand, in their belt, or at their side. And that this overreach and authoritarianism, this abuse of power by police in general, the federal government in particular, especially the ATF and the FBI, would be very much seen by that generation as a degradation of our rights. The very thing that they fought to preserve our rights. They would most definitely, one of the things that would pop out to this greatest generation if they were still here with us today is the absolute absurd incompetency of our brain dead president. That there's a man running the country who can't put two sentences together, who keeps falling down, who loses his train of thought, right, while reading a teleprompter. That he forgets where he's at. He doesn't know how to get off the stage. He has to be guided around. That these men would have looked at that as a grandpa that needs to go live in a nursing home or needs to be on this front porch in a rocking chair, not with carrying the nuclear football, not running the world and the free world as we know it, not being the president of our United States. They would be absolutely appalled. I believe that they would see clearly the rigging of the election that occurred in 2020. I know I'll probably get flagged. I don't really care. But there's been numerous cases that have been confirmed. People have gone to prison for their cheating on the election in 2020. And when people stood up against this, see, January 20th, or January 6th, sorry, that's the wrong date. January 6th, the insurrection, I think that would infuriate the greatest generation. Not the people in their protests, but the way that they were hunted down by the federal government, the way they were punished for just being in the building, the way that every person there was tracked down and at least questioned, many of them charged and jailed for simply walking into a place that up until recently was known as the People's House. That, the Capitol is open to the public. People don't seem to realize this. And this is part of why the police and the Capitol Police, they opened the doors and let them in. Because it wasn't illegal for people to want to come to the People's House, right? And so I think that recent event would jump out at them. I think the way that we are heavy-handedly going toe-to-toe with the Russians over Ukraine would also deeply disturb these men that I once knew, these men that are no longer with us anymore, these men who in part we celebrate when we talk about Memorial Day, that they would see the way that we are going toe-to-toe with Russia, risking World War III over a conflict in a country that during their time was firmly part of the Soviet Union. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union all through the glory years of the Soviet Union. And these men would see that place as Russian territory and would see us meddling in their elections as instigating or poking the bear. They would see that we are about to put our entire society at risk over a foreign country that we have little to do with. And some are going to say, that's just baloney, Sage. We fought for the people of France. We fought for the people of Germany. That's very different than what happened in Ukraine. And we didn't fight for those people until the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And, there was a lot of World War II that made it a righteous war. The way we entered the war. We entered the war after being attacked. The way that the enemy was blatantly targeting their own citizens. The way that the totalitarian control was happening in Germany, to where even their own citizens were afraid. Honestly, many of those people would see the United States government the way it's ran today and see parallels with the Nazi Party. They would see parallels with pre-war Germany. They would say that we have become the thing they fought against. Many of them would feel that way, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt. As we celebrate this Memorial Day and we remember those who gave their lives for this country, we have to ask ourselves, would they, if they lived in our time, be that patriotic? Would they see this government as something worthy of fighting for? Or would they see the government itself as an enemy of the people? I think the complete breakdown of the press would be another thing that they would immediately become very disturbed over. The fact that once upon a time, you could more or less believe what was being told to you on the news, and now they lie to your face. in ways that we can check. We can check them to know that that talking head on that cable news network is lying to your face. The lies and the gaslighting and the total loss of honor amongst journalists in particular and the population in general would be something that would horrify these men. These men lived in a time when your word was your bond, that a liar was worse than a thief, that a liar was someone to be exposed and no one to ever trust them again. And yet these lies are being told to your face. Lies about Donald Trump, lies about January 6th, lies about what really is happening in Ukraine, lies about what's really happening in Israel and Gaza, lies about our economy, lies about their personal lives, lies about their religion. They lie, these politicians, the press, a lot of the people on the left have no problem at all, no moral dilemma at all with looking you right in the face and telling you what they know to be a lie and then laugh behind your back because you were stupid enough to believe them. That level of dishonesty was something that only the darkest criminals engaged in at that time. I think they would be appalled at the weaponry that's available to us now. And they would see that with this massive, destructive weaponry that is everywhere in the world, not just in the United States, but China's got it, Russia's got it, most of Europe has it, a lot of the Middle East have these weapons of mass destruction, that we are playing chicken with the great bear of Russia over Ukraine. They would be like, what are these people thinking? We're risking nuclear annihilation over something we have nothing to do with. I think they would be appalled at most everything in our modern culture. And they would be very surprised to know that some people out there are still working towards living the American dream. They still love their neighbor as themselves. There are still people among us who will help a drowning child. There are still people among us who will put their life on the line to save someone else. Someone that would step into an armed robbery and put a stop to it if they could, or even die trying and be willing to. That heroism still exists in the world would be a surprise to them in retrospect, looking at everything else that's decayed, everything else, the destruction of the family, the loss in the trustability of the press, our loss of the ability to trust our own government, the way that the federal government is aligned against the people, the overtaxation, the theft that occurs on every level, the way we're being taxed from every single angle, the not just slow erosion, but the pure assault against the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, and the Fifth Amendment would be appalling to these men. They would be shocked. And they would also be shocked to know that in the midst of all this madness, people like them, to some degree, who have more in common with them than a lot of the others in this country, that those people still exist. People that love freedom and were willing to die to protect it. People who do their best to get by despite having all the cards stacked against them. Those who hold their families together when others are just walking away. I feel like that they would be shocked to know that some of that still exists. And they would take some pride in knowing that the seeds they planted are still producing fruit, even though it's not the bounty of freedom they'd hoped for. I think those men who gave their lives for their country would probably be very anti-government right now. They would be very upset with the press. They would be very upset with the medical field and big pharma. They would be very upset with the loss of freedoms and the erosion and even assault of our First and Second Amendment rights. They would be appalled that you could be visited by the FBI for something you said, for a meme, for a picture and a funny joke. I think that they would be very much disappointed in the world today. So as we remember them, think about what they'd think of us. What can we do to make this world a better place? On this Memorial Day, I ask you to think, what can we do to make this world a better place? I think the first thing we can do is to start talking about these problems. get past our fears of being singled out, get past our fears of ridicule, and have the guts to do what I do on this channel on a regular basis, which is to explain to you what's wrong and why what's happening is wrong. Why we should have an absolute right to freedom of speech. Why we should have the right to keep and bear arms and not have our bedrooms kicked in because bedroom doors kicked in the middle of the night because we sold or bought too many guns. That this they versus us attitude that we are up against with the law enforcement has to be rectified. That this witch hunt of coming after Donald Trump, a man of the people, to try to discredit him, arrest him, keep him in jail, anything to prevent the people from electing who they want. And it looks like if the election were held today, Donald Trump would be our next president. Will we have a peaceful transfer of power? Is Biden not out there campaigning and working the campaign trail? Is he not engaged in public appearances because he's sure the cheat is in and he's going to get a second term? Or have they already given up? There's a big question as to why the Democrats aren't fighting harder in the traditional ways and relying strictly on their gaslighting of the public through the press that's bought and paid for and controlled by this shadow government. I think the shadow government, the deep state, would be the most disturbing thing to these men of old who gave their life for this country if they could see us today. Are they looking down on us and proud of us? Or they look at all of us as cowards for not standing up for our rights, for not being willing to lay our life on the line like they were. They were willing to lay their life on the line for the American dream, and we do not. I think they would be very upset with the way that many of us have given up. And they wouldn't take your pre-tribulation rapture theology as a good reason why you should sit on your hands. I think that would also upset them. See, I knew these men, so I have some right to speak for that great generation. Those who, soldier and lawyer and truck driver and construction worker and cowboy, all laid down their lives, their lives and their families, put on the uniform of this once great nation and fought to protect the weak. They fought to protect their families and their way of life. They fought for what people call democracy. And I believe beyond a shadow of doubt, they would be disappointed in us, in our lack of fight. I think they would be disappointed in our government's involvement in foreign wars that could put this country to risk. Dabbling in other nations' politics. Not just dabbling, manipulating other elections. I think they would be absolutely appalled at the concept that there was any cheating being involved in our election process over these last couple of elections. Who would they vote for? I'm not sure that they would see voting as the answer. I think they would probably do something a little bit more proactive. Fill in the blank for yourself. I want to leave you with a reminder that this channel is funded by viewers like you. And if you want to make a contribution to keep these videos coming, to keep me preaching the gospel and sharing my beliefs about the world events, please hit the link in the description and drop me some sustenance so I can continue to do this important work. And we'll see you next time on Sage Wanderer's Annual Memorial Day State of the Union Address.